Hi, everyone. I'm Kathryn Kerber, your candidate for mayor of Bay Village. And today I have the honor of talking with Chris Glassburn and Bride Rose Sweeney, our area state representatives, to talk about the electrical grid, which I know has been an ongoing problem for a lot of residents. So thank you very much for being here. Do you each want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. I am State Representative Bride Rose Sweeney. I have the honor and privilege of representing Bay Village for the past 3 years. And I think in the time, this has been one of the biggest complaints when I've been out in the community. So I'm just so grateful for your time and attention to trying to educate residents of what's happening and what can be done about it.
I'm Chris Glassburn. I am a representative for North Olmsted and points south of Rep. Sweeney's district, Brook Park, Middleburg Heights, City of Brooklyn, parts of Cleveland. The role that I play in our caucus, Rep. Sweeney and I are both on the Finance Committee, but we're both on the Energy Committee. And until this past week, I served as the ranking Democrat and led on negotiating a big energy reform bill that we did in Columbus earlier this year.
Okay, and that's HB 15?
Yes.
Can you just sum up in sort of layman's terms what HB 15 will do for us?
So
I know it's a big thing, so to sum it up like that might be tricky, but
sure, it's a very big bill. It was a very big change, but what it addressed three or four big issues. The first is that due to a number of corruption scandals in Columbus, Ohioans had been charged to subsidize a very inefficient power plants, some of which were out of state, on their monthly bills. And so that was part of the big First Energy scandal, as well as a thing called OVEC. But the bottom line is we removed that $1.50 charge that was subsidizing some plants that really had no business being part of our bills in our portfolio. And that's one of the last steps of the corruption scandal that needed to still be addressed years later. Second big thing is that Ohio had flat energy demand for 3 decades, but now due to a variety of things, from data centers to cryptocurrency to growth of some manufacturing aspects in our state, we have utility usage going up. And that means that existing customers are competing with data centers for that same electricity at the end of the day. And that is driving up our rates and then from other states as well. Third big thing in this was that, again, due to that corruption issue, the utility companies hadn't had to justify their rates, some as long as 17 years, and show their work for how they were maintaining our systems. And so power outages have been getting more frequent as equipment is aging and not being cared for by some of our utilities. First Energy seems to be one of the worst offenders on that front. So we put in a bunch of new standards for they have to show what they're spending their money on in terms of maintaining equipment, but also they have to disclose information about their equipment failures and make plans to fix it, which they didn't have those standards before. So I don't know if I made it simple for you, but
that sounds great. I mean, disclosure
Yes.
is key in any of these, relationships. Representative Sweeney, you sent a letter, a joint letter to the PUCO. Can you tell us about that letter?
Absolutely. So once we pass this legislation, as Rep. Glassburn just indicated, is pretty wonky, but it is really transformative and one of the only positive steps I've seen the General Assembly make in terms of actual accountability from our utility companies. But a law is only good if we're actually utilizing the new resources and tools. Those individuals, especially on the west side of Cuyahoga County, and just because I'm from here and it's where I represent, are been suffering under outages with very little communication from our utility companies or really any plan for how they're going to happen. Now, we know life happens. Sometimes a squirrel can chew through a wire, but the consistent rollouts and blackouts that people have to deal with are truly unacceptable, especially when these utility companies have been engaged in have been proven to be spending their time on illegal behaviors and not actually spending their money on investing back into actually providing reliable sources. I have heard stories of people missing days of work because their childcare center lost power. Who's going to take care of their children? There are seniors who, in the middle of summer, who can't have their oxygen tank refilled or recharged. I mean, there are real consequences. People can be resilient, but people shouldn't have to live with no responsibility, no plan of action. And even as a state lawmaker who has been fighting for this for years, you get little response, even as a public elected official that has a little bit of control over our utilities. I couldn't imagine what the average Ohioan who is trying to get some answers and, more importantly, some actual action. So the last part of what Rep. Glassburn indicated is why we wrote the letter is so that our PUCO, which is a regulatory body over all of our utility companies, to look into these historic problems. One of the main things that changed was once a community has experienced 5 outages, which would be a lot of people probably listening to this call, they need the PUCO, the regulatory body, should be making sure that our utility company is reporting that there's public information, and that there's also a corrective action plan. That has never existed before. Before, it just felt like they were putting out the fires. If you made enough noise, if you had the right people calling, they would try to mitigate what they viewed as a PR situation, rather than just looking at where are the biggest problems, why are they happening, and how are we long-term going to make sure that Ohioans have reliable power. We're talking about a basic utility that people need to survive in this day and age. And there was no standards previously. So there's a new standard. Once you hit 5, a utility company has to have a corrective plan. There has to be actual public posting of capacity maps for politicians and for the general public. It helps us try to force the utility companies to be responsive to the problems that are usually mostly within their capacity to fix. Mind you, there's so much more we need to do, especially in the state legislature, to truly fix a lot of the problems that we have. So this is a scenario, this is a very good first step, was getting this law passed. But again, a law is only good if we're actually making sure it's being enforced. And that's why me, Rep. Glassburn, Rep. Tristan Rader, who's been a big champion of all of these items, and actually even a Republican, because this is not Republican or Democrat. This is just about whether or not your politicians are going to be fighting to make sure to hold your utility counties accountable. And we hope that we get a corrective action plan that is satisfactory. And if not, we're going to keep going. But this is just the first step in many in order to further rein in our utility companies.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it seems like when there is an outage, they just come out and sort of put a Band-Aid on it rather than fixing the system. And that's why, we keep having problems. So these corrective action plans, I'm hoping, will be more proactive in fixing the system rather than just putting a Band-Aid on.
That's the goal.
Okay.
We're going to see how this law is actually implemented, if there's
Right.
we need to do. But in part of it is making sure they're prioritizing the communities most in need, not what is maybe most politically advantageous for them or who are their maybe friends. Is if a community is experiencing the most outages, that is who should be taken care of first. But if we're being very honest, part of the long problem is a lack of investment into the equipment and the grid that makes sure that we have a reliable source. Something that we were not able to do, which actually blows my mind, is to prohibit utility companies from using money, ratepayer money, for political contributions. We saw as one of our utility companies in all of our backyards used $61 million that was proven in a court of law to basically bribe the state legislature to get a rate case. And why were they spending the money on those things instead of investing in the grid? They had $60 million to give to politicians, but they couldn't invest in upgrades to make sure that all of their customers had reliable power. So there's much larger issues. And so part of this is peeling back the onion, seeing how they're actually planning to go forward. I don't want anyone to think that just because we sent a letter, there's going to be no more power outages. But we couldn't even as a politician get access to this information. So now we can use the public pressure to get them to do the right things, to be spending the money that is going to make sure that we have a reliable energy grid, that we have reliable energy, and that outages are going to happen, but we are experiencing too many for me to believe that it's just happenstance and not from a lack of direct investment.
Okay. What can residents expect to see change in the short term? Anything yet? Has this been implemented enough that we'll see any kind of change anytime soon? I don't know who would like to answer that.
Sure. So the law just took effect in August. The whole law. It took decades of neglect to get to this position. It should not take decades to get out of that. But there is a reality of we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment that hasn't been replaced, hasn't been maintained. But it's not just equipment. There's more, you have to have the trees trimmed every 3 to 4 years around the lines. That's one of the big drivers of these outages. And so when they don't invest in tree trimming and spend it on political contributions instead, it causes outages. And so First Energy is clearly on notice. They're clearly going to have to report. They're going to have to go justify the rate. And again, this is such a basic thing that it's mind-numbing that it wasn't the case. They're going to have to go make a case and show the state why they're charging what they're charging and how it's benefiting customers. It's easy to forget that our utilities are monopolies, and so they get a rate of return, but in exchange for that, they have to tell us what they're spending the money on. So, as a customer, you should expect that this is going to improve over the next few years. In the meantime, the old method of getting your elected officials to scream about outages is still probably one of the bigger tools in your toolbox. Lakewood Mayor Megan George, Cleveland City Council persons Charlie Slife and Brian Casey, North Olmsted Mayor Nicole Daley Jones, each have had very public fights with First Energy, and each time magically the tree trimming crews all of a sudden show up a week later. And that's not a good systemic way to get things done. But until First Energy has cycled through and made these investments, you have to judge for your own community, but you probably need your elected officials to be jumping up and down and screaming over the next year or two until this gets fully implemented.
Right. So it's still the squeaky wheel response until we get more procedures in place for it. All right. I don't know that we've had a lot of that in Bay Village, but I would certainly be in favor of advocating for this. And it would be great to know that you guys are part of the team that's trying to get this fixed for everybody. Do you know, and this might be too technical a question, we've had a lot of outages in Ward 3 in particular, even on beautiful sunny days. Do you know what could cause an outage like that?
So there's, as I said, there's three things that really drive a lot of the outages. One is the lack of tree trimming. Even on a sunny day, a light breeze, you got Bay Village is a community that's 100 plus years old. You've got trees that are 80 or 100 years old that we don't think of trees having a lifespan, but a lot of the trees in this area they live 80 to 120 years. And so if you don't trim those trees, if you're not actively working with your residents to either remove trees that are in the dead or in the process of dying, like that is something communities can and should actively work with their residents to make sure there aren't trees. Now, it's also First Energy's problem to trim trees within the utility right away. But, if you got an 80-foot or 100-foot tree, that's 40 feet away from the power lines, that's not First Energy's problem. And so if it falls on something, naturally, that's going to cause an outage. Second big thing and I'm sorry for getting in the weeds here, is the equipment age. The most equipment that are on the lines and are on your poles should be less than 20 years old in terms of industry standard for maintaining it. A lot of First Energy's equipment is 40 years old, 50 years old. And so it just fails. It gets less predictable. It might work most of the time for 60 years, but as it gets older, it's more likely to fail. The third thing is that, everybody experiences those outages that go for like a half a second. That is the system being resilient. There's supposed to be 2 levels of power going everywhere, so that if a tree hits this, that second that it's off is it switching to the other line. And so, but if you're getting a lot of those, that should tell you there's a problem. And so that means, again, that either there's a lot of problem. You shouldn't be going to your fail safe, once a week. And so we have a lot of these problems in my home city, North Olmsted. A couple of weeks ago, we had 4 outages in a week, and there was no storm. That says there's something going on. There's a probable piece of equipment failing, and First Energy needs to figure out where it is.
Okay. Like Representative Sweeney was saying, people tend to lose a lot of, work time or, a refrigerator full of groceries when we have these outages. Is there any way to compensate or remediate what happens to households when they're out of power for a long time?
So, well, first and foremost, especially as we continue these issues, I would always, you should report these outages, and there's a way to do it through online or on the phone, and it is the more calls they get. But I also ask people, which might not be the first on your list, maybe after the fact you should deal with that rally, is notifying your lawmakers. I'm not everywhere. I'm not aware of all of these issues, but it is my job to advocate for all the people that I represent. And if you're getting persistent outages, I only know that of the people telling me. And so part of the problem I see holistically across government, we can create the best program, the best bill, but if people don't know about what services are available, it doesn't do you much. And so if there are, because I think that there are certain levels, I think it was last year when we had that outage for 4 or 5 days, we had a call with the governor, Mike DeWine. We called for an emergency declaration. When you do that, there are certain things that the state can chip in terms of if you're a local business. It's all very complicated, but it doesn't hurt if you are somebody that lost revenue because of your business or the food in your fridge. There are certain metrics. And so you can always call utility companies, but sometimes if you call your state rep, sometimes we get a little bit more of a direct and clear answer. And so I think it's all relative to kind of the particular situation and the severity of that situation. But even oftentimes, if there's not things that the government can do, I know that there were certain nonprofits that were offering water to people, or I know our public libraries were opening up. And so looking towards, that information should hopefully be being shared by all your politicians to get that out. But I always see all the people that contact my office that I'm able to, just be kind of a switchboard of, this is what I know about the situation, or let me find the information out. And you can really help people that way, but all the people that don't know. So first and foremost, if it's impacted your life, I want to know about it. I know if you live in Rep Glassburn's area, he wants to know about it, because again, what we were able to do was just a first step, and we're going to continue to fight. And we want people also to fight this as well, to talk about it. We need our local officials also on the back end pushing us. So it's not like we're just yelling into the void, but we have a whole army of people behind us that want not to just pass bills in name only. And that does make a difference in terms of us getting those next steps, holding them more accountable. We can't just rely on sending a letter. So that's just the first step, but it's helpful when we can see that these things are happening and they're not following the law, or companies don't like the problems that this causes with their public relations, and so they could be offering those types of solutions and monetary funds or replacing groceries. But again, how do you know about that? I guarantee if that's happening, you're politicians and they can kind of say, oh, we checked the box, but did they actually proactively go out and tell every single person that's available for these resources? Very unlikely. And so that's where you take it upon yourself to say, hey, let me just send an email to my office or to Rep Glassburn, whoever represents you. And maybe there isn't anything, but we complain enough. Maybe the next time there could be more resources as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So
are there? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I would address it a little bit. So I'm in my first year as a state representative, but 7 years before that, I was North Olmsted City Council, and from a local community perspective, you don't control the power lines, but you do control how you respond in a crisis, and are you problem solvers or not? And so what I mean by that is, it's a terrible way to address this problem, but we had a bunch of people spending thousands of dollars installing home generators. Mm-hmm. And so we made sure that we adopted regulations to allow home generators. We made sure our building inspectors knew those regulations so that if someone did do it, that they wouldn't be getting hassle from the city. We worked with we've had to work with our trash vendor to ensure that we can do special bulk pickups if we have an outage, because people end up having to throw out their whole refrigerator. And so if an entire city's or a big section of the city's thrown out a freezer or refrigerator it's a problem for trash collection. And so we make sure that we're ready for that so that it doesn't become a spillover crisis. And third, we have a city food bank, which is a little unusual. When we have these crises, we tell people and we make sure that those who are most vulnerable, who maybe don't always make any kind of regular use of the food bank, know that we go to the Cleveland Food Bank, we ask for extra food when these things happen so that we can help people restock after they've lost everything in their refrigerator. And so it's being a problem solver and being part of helping people through it. None of that changes the fact that the outage happened, but it's what can you do about it as a community?
Right. Yeah, we do have a community cupboard, so that is a good resource to remind people of when we have events like this.
The news in this bill that we got passed, the new standards for outages was a specific amendment I had requested and got in. And I'm a Democrat and a Republican supermajority, so that's not normally something they do. And I'm not trying to gloat about me, but the chairman told me the thing that cut through for him was when I told him that our city had passed ordinances on regulating generators because we had so many of them that it had reached a point we had to do something, for noise reasons and public safety. And people think it's natural. They think about themselves. They don't know what's going on in your community, and so you have to tell them. And you never know what's the thing that'll cut through. I jokingly for a week texted that same chairman every time I had a power outage, and he was dumbfounded that I did it again 4 times in a week. I said, this causes people to lose work. We're doing all these things as a state to get people to work, to get school, get kids' grades up. If you can't have power, everything stops. Everything stops. And if you're an active official, whether you're a mayor or a city council person or a state rep, you have to tell that story. That's your story, not just working with groups is good, but you have to tell your story and don't assume people know.
Right. One of my focuses as a candidate is I want to provide better customer service to the residents in Bay Village. So I think advocating for them on this issue and a lot of other issues will be really important. We have generally directed people to report outings to the First Energy website because they're the people who most immediately need to know. I'm wondering if there's a way to ask First Energy to notify the local elected officials when there's an outage in their area. So that we can know as soon as it's reported, so that the elected officials will know as well as First Energy when something's reported. I don't know if that's been considered, but I think it might be nice to have.
So I think part of the beforehand, there was no standardization, there was no requirement. You could ask First Energy or your utility company. You'd have to go after them. Continue to ask them. The information would come. But part of what we were able to achieve in House Bill 15 was actually, for the first time, actually putting some guardrails and mandates of sharing that information, not just with public officials, but actually to the general public as well. Because there's often, oh, it's not that bad. That's just anecdotal information. And how in the world are we as the legislature, who's in charge of regulating these companies, supposed to make decisions when we can't even, there's not a streamlined shortage. So the amendment that Rep. Glassburn was talking about, if a community has more than 5, there has to be a public corrective action plan. All outages have to be reported. And I think it's going to be very eye-opening once people understand how frequent this is happening. And especially if you're in an area of the state, as I think Rep. Glassburn just indicated, that maybe it's not impacting them, but they should still be horrified that there are people experiencing this. And it doesn't just have to be trusting Rep. Glassburn, texting the chairman every time it happens, but actually having information and real data so that we can make real decisions with that. So we're still gonna, this bill was just implemented. We just sent this letter. And so we're going to see how this is actually being realized. If it needs to be, sometimes there's ways people can check the box of following the law, but is it actually real public information? Is it way that the general public can really access it and you don't have to go pouring through the PUCO's website or First Energy, or I just get it in an email, and how am I sharing that information? So we're going to see how this law is being implemented and if it keeps happening. And that's why I suggested if you want to notify or to keep track and to send to our office, we can actually kind of do a check to make sure that the information I am getting is actually accurate as well. And not to say that there's nefarious activities, but sometimes when we pass these recording or requirements that, they do it for a little bit and they get a little lax. And sometimes it's because they're putting out other fires or worrying about other things. But it's me and Rep. Glassburn and all lawmakers to make sure that they're following the law in the way that we intended to pass it. And the more information we can get, the better we can hold our utility companies accountable. So we're going to see how this is actually going to be realized. But hopefully we get to a place, and it might be some growing pains to say, okay, you maybe by the practical matter are doing what it says, but that's not what we meant. Does that actually get at the goal? And that's where we don't have to pass another bill. We just need the public pressure. And that's where working with local officials to give us the backup saying we need to have this information. Or I'm hearing from my residents that they've been having 5 outages, but maybe because once you hit 5, that corrective action plan goes into effect, maybe they're being a little cute about what they define as an outage. And you just never know. And so that's where what we have started here with the lawmakers that signed on to that letter is we're not just going to pat ourselves on the back and say, look how great we did. We're going to keep following. We're going to keep pushing, because it's not just about passing laws and moving on to the next thing. It's holding them accountable. And that's unfortunately a never-ending job that you just have to keep doing, but that's what we signed up for.
Right. So what are your next steps with this process?
So my private theory that I think will get proven correct, but we'll see, is that in particular, First Energy's outages are going to be shown to be much more extensive than have been reported previously. And they're going to have a lot of work to do. And so It's keeping the State Utility Commission, the public PUCO, that's what that acronym is. It's keeping them to being actively engaged, to continue to keep hearing that even if the outages go from 20 this year to 18 next year, that is a distinction without a difference in terms of that this effort needs to be robust enough that it is not stopping people from working, people from having to throw out their groceries, from people not having to call off of school or whatever, especially during wintertime or when the weather's real bad. There are other consequences for people. And so it's going to be keeping up that pressure, and that the steps that First Energy and other utilities have are meaningful changes, not just checking that box.
Right. What can residents do in the short term? Any suggestions for them? Keep reporting their outages?
Absolutely. It is still just the fact of the matter that they are likely the people that get the most attention are the ones that make the most noise.
Okay.
And so you should always report to First Energy. You should contact your local elected officials, also your state rep. It's not just about me. It's the more voices, the better. Don't just assume that your count, because Ward 3 is getting more than Ward 1, but Ward 1 should still help. And what could our local elected officials do to help that message as well? And just at the end of the day, you just think about it practically of, nobody, not politicians, not companies, like when there's bad press about them. And so as somebody that, I sign up for that. But I always say, if you want to get a politician's attention, start tagging them on Facebook as to why they're not responding to you. Obviously, I think we, especially now more than ever, we need positive discourse. But when you start talking to your friends and neighbors, start pushing on your council people, your mayors, your state reps, what have you done to fight to help make First Energy more responsive, to make sure that it's not something that could have been fixed within a few hours didn't take 7 hours? And when you have outages that last more than the day, there should be a response. I think it's absurd that we just say, well, that happens. Well, your power's back on. We're going to move on to the next thing. That's part of the job of your elected officials, from the very local level to the state level, even to the federal level. It takes all of us. And that is, I think, also our civic duty is demanding your politicians work for you. And hopefully we all have politicians that are already doing that. If not, I think it can and should make a difference if you are experiencing these issues and you call up whoever represents you and ask, what have you done? What can be done? But not just, oh, it's not my problem. Well, what are you going to do about it? You have some kind of say of representing this community. And I would ask everyone that represents you, what have they done to make sure that our community is being taken care of appropriately?
Right.
Okay. Again, for local officials, it comes back to being a problem solver. And you have to be the convener and give, it's not Ward 2 North Olmsted Councilman Chris Glassburn's job to make the power utility work, but I can be a convener. Any of your officials in Bay Village can be a convener and go partner with your mayor and the rest of your council and say, First Energy, we want you to come out to a community meeting and meet these people. And First Energy probably will do it if enough of you do it together. And when that happens, those residents, what can a resident do? Show up to that meeting and tell them to their face what you're dealing with. When we did this in North Olmsted, when we had 300 people just from one housing development, 300 people come and tell them to their face, no, I have had more than 20 outages in the last year. Your numbers are wrong.
We actually are
I've had to
having
throw
one.
my groceries away twice in the last year. This is not acceptable. We are not a developing country that is settling land for the first time. This is a community that's exists for decades.
Right. We actually are having First Energy out to talk to City Council on October 20th. So that'll be That'll be
Show
an
up to the
interesting
meeting.
meeting. Yeah.
Tell residents to show up to the meeting and tell their story.
Yeah.
And the media will cover that. And so it becomes a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. All right. This has been super helpful. Are there any takeaways that you would like us to have from this whole issue?
Well, I just want to say you are the first person to ask us to talk about this issue. When a lot of people hear about House Bill 15, their eyes kind of glaze over because it is a little boring, a little wonky, but it's one of the most impactful bills to everyday lives, to a complaint I hear all the time. So I just want to thank you, Kathryn, for just going above and beyond of trying to educate yourself, but most importantly, of what we can do to make this better for the residents in our collective community. So I just appreciate you taking it upon yourself to do this work, because this is exactly what we say is practicing what you preach. It's, I think this is part of actually making that bill work. And I'm just very grateful for you even caring enough to share this with our community.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think Rep. Sweeney said it pretty well. Those who show up make the difference, and that whether that's a resident or your public officials. So, you're putting in the effort here today, and it makes a difference.
And thank you very much for your advocacy for all of your constituents, and for writing this legislation, and for continuing to follow up and fight for our interests. I really appreciate that too. All right. This has been really wonderful. I appreciate your time and all of your hard work on this. All right. Thanks very much. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon as I continue to advocate for this for Bay Village. All right. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.